Hello, and welcome to another installment of Overrated. This is late for July, as by the time you're seeing this, it is likely no longer even August. The reason for that is the subject matter, and it is entirely fitting, considering. Yes, I am looking at the movie that, for the first time since probably Citizen Kane, is setting me up for the biggest attack. Citizen Kane was lauded for everything, really, but is lauded because it is known as the greatest movie. However, Titanic is lauded for being the most successful, until Avatar, that is. But for a period of over 10 years, Titanic, the first movie to surpass 1 billion at the box office, was the reigning champion of the box office. 1997 through 2009. As I said, it was the first to do 1 billion. It was also, of course, there is research involved. It was 600.8 million domestic, 658.7 under a re-release. It was done in 3D very recently to celebrate the centennial of the sinking. The foreign box office was 1.528 billion. So the overall total is 2.186 million. Billion. Avatar is 760 million domestic. And Avengers is 623. Titanic, lifetime, is 658. Now the worldwide box office is another entire animal. But it does have that record. What is more impressive, however, are the weekends. See, Titanic actually had 15 consecutive weekends at #1 at the box office. Nowadays, we just had Guardians of the Galaxy get 2 in a row. Doesn't happen very often. X-Men Days of Future Past had 2 in a row. Captain America the Winter Soldier had 3. Doesn't happen anymore. Back before the blockbuster a week, or even just the national release a week of today, and even the 90s, movies would be in theaters for quite a long time and on top. For example, I mentioned 15 consecutive #1 weekends. That's 15 of 15, by the way. That surpassed a record that was held by Beverly Hills Cop since 1984 and 1985. It had 13 consecutive weekends, out of 14 total #1s. That's how long that record lasted, until 1997. Avatar had 7, and is the modern winner. The only other ones to really compare with more weekends at #1 would be E.T. the Extraterrestrial in 1982, with 16 #1 weekends. 6 consecutive. Tootsie had 13 of 14, also in 1982. So that's the kind of thing. That type of thing hadn't happened, and nothing had even challenged that for almost 20 years, until Titanic. Now, all of that said, there is the pedigree of this film as well. The Academy Awards, my favorite. So what does Titanic have with that, you might ask? Well, more research, of course, so forgive me for having to be reading facts to you, but this is all pertinent information for where the discussion will go. Because you can't simply just talk about Titanic without actually accrediting it much of its success. Titanic is the second of only 2 films to receive 14 nominations at the Academy Awards. And there's been different award categories added and subtracted through the years. So overall, like, we're just counting total ever, no with or without certain things, because there were different ones where a comedy was involved or different type of shorts. No. 14. The second after Ben-Hur. Only 2 films have been nominated for that many. It is also, of course, the first to have grossed over $1 billion worldwide. And it is the second of 3 to win 11 awards, including the Best Picture. Now, the most nominations ever. And forgive me, I mentioned Ben-Hur. I got ahead of myself. The most nominations ever was 1950 for All About Eve with 14. It won 6. So when Titanic came along with 14 nominations and won 11, new champion. And for the record, there are others such as Chicago, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, Forrest Gump, From Here to Eternity, and 5 others with 13 nominations, and not a single one getting single digits. Beyond single digits, excuse me. There's a lot of information here. So, Titanic is an anomaly in that sense. Especially when you consider the wins. Titanic has 11 wins, along with Ben-Hur. That's where Ben-Hur was. Ben-Hur won 11 out of 12. And Ben-Hur was from 1959. Titanic was the new champion, though statistically 11 out of 12 versus 11 out of 14, Ben-Hur edged it. And of course things changed with The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King in 2003, where it won 11 out of 11. So Titanic. James Cameron is the single greatest action director of the 80s and 90s. Financially speaking. I personally preferred John McTiernan. But you cannot overlook what Cameron did with the original Terminator, which may be a subject for another day, alongside Terminator 2, Judgment Day, and of course he's also lauded for The Abyss, True Lies, etc. And really though, there's not that many he's done, because he got to Titanic and then didn't make a movie until 2009's Avatar, 12 years later. Granted, he did have IMAX documentaries and such in between, which does kind of spike his box office averages a bit, but that's it. And it seems now that we'll have 3 more Avatars coming in the next few years, even though it's already been 5 since the first. So Cameron is basically able to pick and choose whatever he desires. However, we need to look at what the critics were saying as well. This is from 2004 by Leonard Maltin, and one who I generally trust, however, is often very inconsistent. He will give 2 stars to a movie that says it tried hard, it did rather well, and achieved what it was hoping to be, but was a little flawed here and there. Then he will also give 2 stars to something that basically was an absolute mess, failed on every level, and really has nothing going for it. So that's one of the problems with the star system, I find. But overall, he's rather entertaining in his reviews, and I do generally enjoy what he has to say. About Titanic, he says it is a sweeping romance set against the backdrop of the RMS Titanic's maiden voyage in 1912, and framed by a modern-day story of a salvager who stumbles onto a heretofore unknown survivor of the sinking. Fair enough. Spectacular in every way, an eye-filling recreation of the sights and sounds of the grandest ship of its time, but what keeps it afloat are the magnetic performances of the young leads. Storytelling savvy and momentum make up for some banal dialogue. Some footage of the actual Titanic wreckage is sprinkled into the opening sequence, written by the director, winner of the Academy Awards, etc., etc. And it won Best Picture, Director, Visual Effects, Music, Song, Cinematography, Sound, and Costumes. Now, very opinion-based. There's not much there saying compared to something else or whatnot, so that's fair. That's what I'm doing. I would never say that he's wrong, because he would probably look at mine and say, you're wrong. But with his merits involved and what he's talking about, it's understandable. For what it is, fair enough. However, there is, of course, also another book that we've already seen with the thin red line. 1001 Movies to See Before You Die. Again, not an attack on the book. And the opening line says, the story behind director James Cameron's labor of love is almost more dramatic than the tale that unfolds on screen. The greatest movie of all time, and it's almost more interesting to know how it took to make it. It mentions things like the delays to filming because the cast and crew were poisoned by a PCP-laced flood in Nova Scotia. Cameron being a crazed perfectionist, which really is unlike anything like you see with a Michael Bay even. They're multimillionaires and they're paid to do what they do, and they're perfectionists because if it's not right and they know it, has to be that way. No fault. No fault at all. He even mentions they hired the original company that provided the real Titanic's furnishings as supervisors so that every chandelier and plate was a perfect replica. The film had more than 1 billion box office worldwide and the most Academy Awards since Ben-Hur. He was rechristened a genius. It was his folly going in after all. And is now deservedly considered one of the most successful directors of all time. And absolutely is when you consider box office financials. Even if it was the most expensive movie of all time, it made $2 billion at the box office. Mathematically, there's no way it cost that much. It's okay. Now they say it's half Poseidon Adventure and half Love Boat, with romance and deep-sea disaster in equal measure. And really, it just says it's a blockbuster if there ever was one, has one of the biggest selling soundtracks of all time, and in terms of production size and sheer epic, it remains one of the most impressive films of all time. Not much there really talks about the story. They mention the performances, yes. They mention the impressiveness of the look. And that's where I come in. Because I remember seeing this film on 2 VHS tapes, no less. It was in that era, and it was so long it took 2, that when it came time to swap the tapes, I didn't want to. It still hadn't grabbed me. It might be the setting of the 1912 era, not caring for it. Might be supposedly wanting to care for this dashing young rogue, who I didn't care for. Or Kate Winslet's character, who I didn't care for. Or so on and so forth. There was no hook. I wasn't intrigued. Even Twilight got me interested in the concept and idea. And it's not that I knew the Titanic would sink. That's not the point of the movie. That was always the biggest joke. The spoilers for Titanic are how it ends, and everyone knows what will happen. Oh, it's about the journey. I get that. Obviously. And they even mentioned with Malton's review the modern story of someone reviewing back on it. So what happened? What does she know? She survived. What happened to her? Alright? So what happens with this movie is that I'm watching it after the Academy Awards. And I'm wondering why it's getting Best Picture. I'm wondering why it's getting Best Visual Effects. I'm wondering why it's getting all of these awards. Except for cinematography. It's very well shot. And the production design is very good. It looks very good. But it's boring. It's uninteresting. There's no rhyme or reason to care for any of it. It drags, very much so, and plods along with the story that is uninteresting when you do know the end result where she lives. You put, again, as I mentioned, you want to see what happened to her and what's going on. Except when they put her into danger, the suspension is gone. You've lost it, because you know what happens. The suspense is lost. So you're hinging everything on that. And it's gone. So this movie, Titanic, is it bad? No. Not one movie I've ever reviewed on Overrated is bad. Not one bit. I have no idea why it got the following it did for $1 billion, $2 billion. Soundtrack of the decade, all of that. Is it because the girls were identifying with Rose and fawning over DiCaprio? Is it the Twilight effect? Where was the able to insert yourself in and view on? Was that what it was? Quite possibly, because a lot of people of my generation who were of that age at that time in the late 90s liked the movie quite a bit. It's very possible that's why. It's understandable why, because like I said, it's the Twilight effect. It's the Hunger Games effect to an extent as well. The self-insertion. Not quite Mary Sue, but I can see that. I can insert myself there and get swept up in it. Now that doesn't explain that making that kind of money. So it did achieve beyond and get everybody involved. And I'll admit, when the action happens with the crash and the sinking, Cameron's in top form. And maybe this is all just me upset that we didn't get any action movies out of him between basically Terminator 2 and True Lies and Avatar. And instead he did Titanic and Deep Sea Challenge movies. Maybe it's all linked to that. And quite honestly, there is a lot of despair over that. I've been deprived John McTiernan movies over some illegal wiretapping imprisonment, and yet Cameron just wants to go look for shipwrecks in a boat. But I fault him not for it. I want to do this. There's always that element of, this is what we do. And yet I feel that I've not said nearly enough on Titanic to cover it, because it is the movie of movies. It was surpassed by Avatar, as I said, and challenged by Marvel's The Avengers. And who knows what will come of Marvel's The Avengers Age of Ultron, or even The Hunger Games Mockingjay Parts 1 and 2. There are movies out there that will challenge this box office-wise. No one thought it could for Titanic. It was the unachievable. And then Avatar did it, also by Cameron. Now there's something to it, because Avatar is another story. James Cameron's Titanic is overrated because it's not that impressive of a movie whatsoever. It's not bad in any way. I find it boring, but it just means it's not for me, and I understand that. Considering the movies I've reviewed at the Guilty Pleasure Cinema, it's pretty obvious Titanic's not for me, which is a shame considering who it's by. But when it's that successful, that's the kind of movie that seems to be for everyone. Everyone can link in and find their story within it and love the movie. And I know I'm not the only one to think otherwise on that. So think back on Titanic and your viewing of it and how much you enjoy it or not, and quantify its enjoyment, because I find it to be a very bland, regular movie with an astronomical budget to make it look fantastic. And yet it's a regular story about a character that's not very likable in situations that you, therefore, by virtue of that, don't care if he wins or loses for 3 hours. In an eventual story that you know how it's going. It just seems to have everything weighing against it. And yet for 12 years was the most successful film of all time. It's one that can't quite put a finger on. Like, spectacular in every way. But then the story behind it is more impressive. And yet, many people didn't even know of all that story behind it. So how does it achieve this? It just captured something of the era. In 1997, I mean, this book goes by year. So let's go back to 1997 to see what else there was. But I can already tell you, I mean, when I think 1997, the first movie to come to mind is something like The Lost World, Jurassic Park. And that's not speaking ill of the year whatsoever. It's just, I don't think of it as one of the years to have the great movies. I know the next year following was 1998 with Saving Private Ryan, and its absolute robbery of its Academy Award. But 1997, let's see. We have Ang Lee's The Ice Storm. We have Takeshi Kitano's Hana Bai, which, being Kitano, is a rather ridiculous, crazy man. Paul Thomas Anderson's Boogie Nights. Curtis Hanson's LA Confidential. Michael Haneke's Funny Games. Alejandro Amenabar's Open Your Eyes. Adam Agoyan's The Sweet Hereafter. Titanic. Abbas Kiarostami's Taste of Cherry. And then we have 98 with Saving Private Ryan. 97 was the year of Titanic. Perhaps it was just a drought, and that movie came at the end of the year and destroyed and overtook and was something that people were waiting for the entire year. They had nothing else to latch on to. Perhaps. Perhaps. Other movies around that time were Spawn, Mortal Kombat Annihilation, Slim Pickings. Even though I believe those were 98 or 96, so. Why is Titanic the movie? Why was it, at least? Because it was surpassed. Until 4 years ago, it was the movie. No matter what came out, it would not beat Titanic. Nothing even came close. Nothing had a chance. And it did things no movie had done for decades. At the Academy Awards for 50 years. In the box office realm for 10. Why did a movie about a story that everyone knows do that? Maybe because people knew. Maybe people wanted to see the crash. And I didn't mean the iceberg. I mean to see the movie fail. Perhaps they did. It's not like it was the first to do this type of thing. We'd seen disaster movies before. It mentions Poseidon Adventure from the 70s. Nothing new. Independence Day was a year prior. Was it the disaster movie? Was it that? Was it the Young Romance? This one I truly can't quantify. And for that very reason, is overrated. I don't understand it. And I usually can try to find the reason why. Why the movie is successful. Even though I don't like it, what the appeal is. And I don't ever say anyone's wrong for liking something. Never. I may disagree with their opinion, and they may say things, and I will argue the point to that. They may say things about it that I find wrong. When someone says it's lazy directing, I may have issues with that and say that is wrong, but that is still based on opinion where I don't find it to be lazy directing, etc., etc. But Titanic, if someone were to say it's their favorite movie, and I know they do, it's never able to really be quantified. So, it's an anomaly in every way. So why? It is overrated simply because it can't help be quantified as to why it is so successful. So I leave you with that, and we'll be back shortly with another, because this technically is 2 months late. Overrated is quarterly. It was due for July. August, September, October. Back for Halloween. What could it be? Truly no idea. Will it be Halloween related? Possibly. Titanic. What do you do after Titanic? What do you do? I thank you for joining me on Overrated. And please, if you're able to quantify either side of this movie, please do. And perhaps I'll review it, because it is one that definitely deserves to be revisited, re-reviewed, re-released. Maybe a full re-watching. We'll see. It's a spectacle that everyone knows. Taps into something. It's an anomaly. And for that reason, it's overrated.